All right, so we've already got one league up today where we showed Dimir Shadow with Search for his Canta. So that video is up on YouTube if you haven't checked it out yet. Second league we're doing today is, instead of the Search for his Canta, going back to the fourth Drown in the Lock, and then dropping the second Go for the third in the board to go back to the second Engineered Explosives. Some of the reasoning here is, if you haven't watched the other video yet, go watch that. But basically, I was pretty underwhelmed with Search for his Canta. Thought that the Drown in the Lock made more sense. Another card to help out against like rhinos, against what's it called? Living End, stuff like that, as well as be like that seventh copy of Fatal Push / Drown, like that early removal spell for 1-drops, 2-drops, stuff like that. So I wanted to run through the league with those changes. So let's go ahead and get rolling with that. Magical off screen. Magical coming back on screen eventually. There we go. So, round number 1. We unfortunately lose the die roll, but we have a decent hand. We've got Wraith to help enable Shadow, Counterspell, Thoughtseize. We get to Thoughtseize our opponents, get Terminate. They've got a Fable, so we're assuming some sort of either scam or like black-red mid-range. Not sure yet completely, but we know we do have just like double Shadow here. So that's a pretty good start, right? We know Croxa was their blind draw. So we're just looking for a turn 3 play. Fable's pretty decent, but if we top deck like a fetch land, we could just kill our opponent here. Or Wraith into a shock land works just as well. So now we get to kill the token, attack in for lethal, hold up counterspell. So really nice little turn 3 kill out of Dimir. Not usually what you expect to see. Sideboarding against Rakdos, bringing out like some Wraiths and Thoughtseizes, bringing in a little more interaction, like Turok in this case. Sometimes the extra Fatal Push. Spreading Seas is good against Blood Moon effects. So little versatility coming in. Bringing in, I think, the extra Stubborn Denial I brought in. So opponent did have like a turn 1 Scam Grief, and they ended up taking our Thoughtseize and Consider and leaving us the Fatal Push, which I thought was a little odd, since we get to just use that Fatal Push to take out their Grief and then find a Dismember for the Ragavan. Maybe they were planning on getting the removal spell out of hand so they could land the Ragavan, and we just kind of messed that up by drawing the second removal spell, but here we are anyway. Play out the Shadow with Dress Down back up in case we need to grow it for whatever reason. Thoughtseize is fine, so we're just going to end a turn, get down the Dress Down so we can attack for 13. More importantly, like maybe find some new cards. So attack in, Stubborn Denial. Obviously, non-ferocious Shadow is a little awkward, but opponent drops a hit at Tsugu, so we get to soft stub that and move on to match number 2. Pretty clean win there. So match 2, we do win the die roll. Opening hand's a little weak. We do have like a Shadow and a Wraith, some lands to help get everything going, but we don't have any sort of like real good interaction. So we'll take the opportunity to soft stub an Ancient Stirrings. With basic force Ancient Stirrings, like I'm not really sure if it's Tron or not. But Power Plant kind of means like, yeah, it's Tron. So we're just going to try to get a little bit of damage in while we can. Get down the Brazen Borrower. Hope that our opponent's a little slow at getting Tron online. Finding Archmage's Charm is nice. So they do find Tron, which means we got to fight over this Wormcoil. Really hoping to find fetch land, a Thoughtseize, something like that. Do find the fetch land after a little fetching around. I thought about playing out the Murktide here. I was like, if we play out the Murktide, we just auto lose to O-Stone, but playing out Murktide could beat some stuff like Wormcoil Engine, Karn, even though we beat Wormcoil anyway. And then they play Cityscape Leveler, and that was just like the out I was not thinking about. I was thinking of a Wrath effect and holding on to the Murktide would play around a Wrath effect. I was not thinking about Cityscape Leveler, just like getting to destroy something on cast, and then if we did attack through, they could escape it, destroy something else. But it also destroys something on attack, so they'd be able to attack down the Murktide anyway, and we're like forced into a chump block. So pretty losing situation there. But on to game number 2. We do have Counterspell Stub. We've got Spreading Seas. I don't really want to like spin the seas until I know what I'm targeting with it. So I'm being a little reserved with it. Like now I know my opponent's going to be able to have Tron. Again, I don't really want to use the Spreading Seas here because if I did use the seas and they had like a backup Tron land, they'd be able to map for the third one anyway. But then we take the map. We see that our opponent doesn't play out a third copy or an extra copy of a Tron land. So we go ahead and Spreading Seas that one or one of the ones they have. But as we saw with the Thoughtseize, they just have like multiple Sylvan Scryings. They have the green source now. So not anything we could really do to keep them from having Tron. Instead, we're just going to play out Murktide, hold up our counter spells, and pray. Stub the Karn so we can hold a counter spell in case our opponent has like a Worm Coil engine or something that we need to hard counter. Played out the second Murktide here. Looking back at this, I think I should have just held on to the Subtlety instead. Like this Karn is definitely getting a counter, but I think that flashing in the Subtlety there would have been a slightly better line. I mean, it's not like Murktide plus Counterspell is a bad line. Here on the draw, we do have turn 1 Thoughtseize, which let's rewind a second. Talk about the Thoughtseize take. Apparently it skipped away. All right, so we Thoughtseize and we see that they have like both a map and a scrying. They've got the star out already, so I'm going to take the scrying just to take like the guaranteed Tron land next turn off the map. They can still Ancient Stirrings here. They top deck another Sylvan Scrying, so they're going to have Tron regardless, which obviously makes our hand pretty bad. Makes it so we want to find a Thoughtseize or a Shadow like ASAP. It's about the only thing we can do now is soft stub like a Karn. And do find a Shadow. So we've got Shadow with the Stubborn Denial. We've got Subtlety to bounce a Planeswalker. And unfortunately, our opponent just has an Ulamog. So we cannot beat that. We will scoop it up. Doesn't matter if we Subtlety it. Like, they can recast it next turn, wipe our entire board. We don't have a hard counter spell. We don't have a backup threat. So this is on to match number 3, I think. On the play, bunch of Wraiths, Thoughtseizes. This is the downside of going heavy on the Wraith plan turn 1, is your opponent just reveals, oh, I've got a bunch of red stuff. Dang. But take a Relic, keep this Drown in the Lock live. Our opponent's hand is like not that scary. They've got Blood Moon, they've got Blast Zone, Bone Crusher, but we do have like Murktide and stuff. Take the counterspell just so we can start aggressively interacting with stuff. Obviously, I would prefer a land or a threat, but I can't really afford to pass up on a live spell. Here, hold up Charm because I do not want my opponent resolving a Blood Moon at the moment. But we will take the opportunity to counter that so that if we find like another fetch land, then Drown in the Lock will be live. I can't really afford to play out a Shadow here. They got the Flame Slash that I know about. But they decided to go for the Bolt Us, and we top deck the land. So now we got Shadow backed up with an Archmage's Charm. They do have Blast Zone, but as long as we can kind of like play around that, we're okay. Which is why I let this Blood Moon resolve. Like now we don't care about Blast Zone, so we can just attack with Shadow, drown in the lock, or not drown in the lock, Archmage's Charm their next play, and then like untap and dress down and kill with the Shadow. So EOT will just fire off our dress down, untap. We've got Archmage's Charm up. I assume they don't have double bolt, because if they did, they probably would have gone in response to the dress down while I was tapped low. But either way, get there game one. Game two, boarding out a bunch of these Drown in the Locks because they have like main deck Relic of Progenitus. So I know Drown's going to be a lot weaker. Turn one Monkey is unfortunate. As I've said numerous times, turn one Ragavan, especially on the draw, is a nightmare for this deck to fight against. So you really, really, really have to have like a solid hand in the Ragavan matchups to warrant not having a turn one answer and keeping. So like I kept this hand because I had the ability to get basics. I had double counterspell, Archmage's Charm. So if my opponent's plays started on turn 3, which it would have if they didn't have Ragavan, it would be Spyro, maybe Blood Moon, whatever, then I'm in a really good position because I've got counterspell on turn 2. But because they had the Ragavan and were able to get things rolling a turn sooner, that put a really big wrench in our plans. So now that Ragavan into Spyro, ditch a couple Grave Hate pieces, just snowballs into like a big hit on turn 3. Then we get down Murktide, but we were just too far behind at that point. But we get to go to game 3 on the play. Again, we've got a hand that's got our basics. It's got Counterspell. We hope our opponent doesn't have Ragavan. So, of course, they have Ragavan. But at least we get to, like, start digging. Maybe find an answer. Those don't look like answers. Definitely don't look like answers. But we'll hold up Counterspell. We can at least start interacting with the big 3 drops if our opponent goes for like a Spyro or a Blood Moon or something. We can tag those. Which, if they use up their treasure to cast a Spyro, we will definitely take that opportunity. I could Spreading Seas the Den of the Bugbear, but if I do that, I'm tapping off of Counterspell. I'm not guaranteed to hit like a Fatal Push or Dismember, so I'd rather just sit back and hold on to the Counterspells. Opponent nukes our yard, which is fine, but like here, we can go for the Spreading Seas, because if our opponent has a land, then they'll be able to fire up the Den, but also we can still hold up Counterspell, which is one of the things that I try to really emphasize with this deck when people are kind of picking it up or trying it out, is if you have the opportunity to hold up Counterspell, I would basically never suggest any line that doesn't involve holding up Counterspell. So Thoughtseize, opponent goes for the Bolt Us. So we're just going to take the opportunity to nab some value out of our Stubborn Denial there. Kill the Ragavan, just hoping our opponent doesn't top deck anything good this turn. Looks like a Fury. But they decide not to cast it. So us getting to untap with Counterspell is huge here. We'll counter the Ragavan because that means they can't get back Spyro tokens. They can't cast a Fury. They can't pop a Ramanap Ruins. Otawara is a little whatever here. So opponent did have the Fury. This is kind of an interesting line. I talk about it all the time, and I really hope people pay some amount of attention to it. The difference between playing to win and playing to not lose. I could Otawara the Fury here and that like gives me a turn off of the Fury attacking at me. Maybe I find a counter spell, whatever. And that's a really good like play to not lose line. Or I can Otawara the Den, not the Den of the Bugbear, Otawara my Spreading Seas. So I get to go to my turn with a blind draw, Spreading Seas for another draw, and get 2 looks at like a threat to stand in front of Fury, or a removal spell for Fury, or something impactful. And I think that's like the play to win line. Like, I'm not in good shape against this Fury anyway, so why not give myself the best chance of getting out of it? Which we find Shadow. The fetch land doesn't really matter, except it lets us outgrow Fury, so I guess it does kind of matter a decent bit. But more importantly, like, we get Shadow. So actually, both those draws ended up mattering, right? Like, the Shadow to get a threat down, the fetch land to let us outgrow Fury. So if we'd gotten one, just the Shadow, it might have been okay. Depends on what our opponent had. Like, if they had Dash Ragavan, we blocked, they evoked Fury, then we're down to just, like, nothing on board, nothing in hand. They've got triple Ramanap Ruins. But, so opponent dashes the Ragavan, attacks with the Fury and the Ragavan. We block the Fury, and we don't have to fetch because the first strike damage hits the Shadow, marks 3 on it, and then the normal damage with the Fury hits at the same time as the Ragavan. Shadow outgrows the damage from the Fury, so we would eat the Fury, take 2 off the Ragavan. So we are dead to like double Ramanap Ruins activation. But because we're fetching down to 9 after the hit, like we were at 7, we took 6 from the Ragavan. We or took 2 from the Ragavan, went down to 5. We fetched to make sure that Shadow was dealing 9, so that this second Shadow would be a second lethal attacker. So if our opponent does untap and has like 2 blockers, we force double chump block. But they just like Ragavan and fire off Ramanap Ruins. So we say, cool, we'll attack in with Shadows. I don't know if they misclicked or something, or just decided they had to do that right there. Either way, round number 4. Keep a hand. It's got double drown with no black mana, but we do have a consider. We've got an Archmage's Charm. Opponent leading on a flip land with a strike it rich means it's almost assuredly Charbelcher. So we'll try to mitigate mana availability a little bit. Like, Drown in the Lock's not hitting an Ironcrag feat. It's not hitting a Charbelcher anytime soon. So kind of the best thing I can do is start using my spells aggressively, so maybe I can fill up their yard and Drown in the Lock can hit something later. But for now, we'll just kind of like hold up some counter magic, make sure we're not in a position to have ourselves get killed. Since our opponent doesn't play a land, we just Otawara their treasure token on their upkeep. So the likelihood of them having like land, ritual, Ironcrag feat, Charbelcher is pretty low. And since we got to go back to our turn, then we finally get to start getting down a threat and attacking. Take a Watery Grave to grow the Shadow, but then we find a fetch land, so our Shadow is going to be ferocious, and that hopefully is about all we need. As long as we make like a smart decision of what we counter with this Stubborn Denial, we should be okay. Which kind of like this, we could counter a ritual, but countering the ritual still leaves us susceptible to like a Pact of Negation. So instead, we wait for the Ironcrag feat. So as soon as the Ironcrag feat resolves, they can only cast 1 more spell. And between Stubborn Denial and Drown in the Lock, we should be able to counter whatever it is. So we do, and our opponent scoops up the game there. But that way we can just kind of like take Pact of Negation out of the equation altogether and say like, hey, you can't counter my counter. Let's go. Opening 7 had like a few cards, but no way to enable our threats. This 6 has got ways to enable our threats. Plus, it's got like a consider, it's got some counter magic. So all we got to do is find something to hit our opponent with. Could fight over the strike it rich, but I don't think that really matters. I'd rather just like hold back the Flusterstorm, maybe fight over like an Ironcrag feat. So opponent's slowly just kind of sculpting their hand. So we're going to take the opportunity to just kind of like draw some cards, get in a better position. We find a Thought Seize. They do have this Leyline of Sanctity, but we have Brazen Borrower that can bounce it. Another Strike It Rich is fine. This is one of the reasons I like having Brazen Borrower. I think it's like a very flexible card in situations like this. Thought Seize. We know we bounce their Leyline. Come on. All right. So we know we bounce their Leyline. We see 3 rituals, Ironcrag feat, and Recross the Paths. If I take Recross, then their rituals are going to put enough cards in the graveyard to where if they do find a Charbelcher, I can let the Ironcrag feat resolve and then drown in the lock the Charbelcher, or just have like counter spells. So I'm just going to take those, and EE will allow me to wipe up these treasure tokens. So I know if my opponent like does, let's say they find a land next turn, or find a Charbelcher next turn. That's like their best top deck, right? Then they go Ritual, Storm Count 1. They've got 4 mana available. Ritual. So they're up to 6 mana available. Storm Count is 3, and they put Ironcrag feat on the stack. I can still Stubborn Denial the Ironcrag feat and shut the entire thing down. So I know that tapping down to 1 mana is safe here. So I'll just EE, wipe up the treasure tokens. This forces them into a Flusterstorm if they go for Ritual, Ironcrag, whatever. If not, if they've top deck like a Recross the Paths, I can Flusterstorm it. All I'm really doing is trying to get back to another turn of open mana. So now I can play the draw go game. I've got Brazen Borrower as a threat. It's not like a great threat, but it's a threat. Counter Valakut Awakening, because I really think my opponent's got like a subpar hand here, and I don't want them being able to flip it into actual cards. So get that. End up top decking a Murktide, which means we get to play out that, hold up Stubborn Denial and Flusterstorm. And then if our opponent doesn't do anything very impactful this turn, then we just get to untap with like all the counter magic in the world. But it looks like they drew dead, so we win that one. On to round number 5, I believe. I think we're 3-1 with the loss being to Tron. On the draw, got lands, consider, Stubborn Denial, Ragavan again, nightmare card to deal with. Thoughtseize sees Terminate Kroxa and a land. They did mulligan to like 5. Top deck of Dolphy is pretty good, but we find a Fatal Push. So we can kill the Ragavan. We'd still have to deal with the Dolphy, but at least we know like our opponent's last card is this Kroxa, which is a ways from escaping. So all we got to do is find an answer to Dolphy, which we do. And now we're kind of on even ground. Even if they found a fetch land, they wouldn't be able to get back Kroxa right there. We find a counterspell, which means now we can fight over Kroxa. And we're just kind of waiting for something impactful to happen. Unfortunately, Spyro's like the best thing that they could draw right there, because we have to counter that. And since we counter it, it means they get back Kroxa. Even if we find a kill spell for the Kroxa, like we're in horrible shape. We're at 1 life, no threat, no cards in hand. So let's just go to game number 2. Kind of like last time against Scam, boarding out like some Wraiths and Thought Seizes. Board out a couple Drowns here because it's not killing the big Scam stuff. Boarding in the Go for the Throat, Spreading Seas, Stubborn Denial, Dress Downs. But thankfully, this time we have the answer for the turn 1 Ragavan. We've also got an answer for this Dolphy. We're going ahead and getting basic island in case our opponent does end up with a Blood Moon at some point. We're not in like a huge rush to get Kroxa down. Or not Kroxa, Death Shadow. Not in a huge rush to get Death Shadow down. But we do just ditch the dress down. It's not doing anything for us anytime soon because we have the counter magic to fight over and evoke elemental. Hearse will go ahead and counter with Drown. So I counter the Hearse with Drown there, not so much because I care about the Hearse, but because it will make the Drown dead as the game goes on. So I might as well convert with the Drown now to get rid of it. Opponent goes for Evoke a Grief. We'll just go for Dress Down, give us our draw, stop the Grief trigger. We're more just like looking for more stuff to do. So we don't really care about the body on board because if we get down a Shadow, we can outrace the Grief. And we kind of want them to hit us to get the Shadow on board. So then here, as we can see, like, let the Hearse resolve because I'm more interested in just like drawing cards, getting Shadow down. Now we've got Shadow. We've got protection from a Lightning Bolt with the fetch land. We've got Subtlety if they do like escape Kroxa here. We've got Counterspell, Stub. Which we'll go ahead and fire off this Stub so I can hold the Counterspell back for like an Evoke Elemental or for a Kroxa escape, something like that. Could have attacked there. But I really don't want to trade the Shadow for a Hearse if they decided to crew and block. Fire off our counter magic pretty aggressively. I am going for the Archmage's Charm here because, like, if they have a removal spell, it's a little unfortunate, but at the same time, I do need to, like, be proactive. Opponent goes for the Undying effect. We again dress down so they don't get the Undying trigger. And if they try to like activate the Hearse in response, it would die. I was really hoping that they would like crew the Hearse and block, and I could dress down and kill the Hearse with that. But they didn't, so be it. They go for Kroxa here. We're just going to subtlety this, improve our board presence. I believe they put Kroxa on top, but I can't remember for sure. Either way, we're just going to hold up Otawar. I'm kind of expecting them to like play the Kroxa with the Kroxa activation on or the Kroxa trigger on the stack, crew the Hearse, and force the chump block with the subtlety. But they end up like thought seizing us first. Obviously, we've got tons of answers for Kroxa as well as the Otawara for the Hearse. So we really don't lose to like much of anything. So they end up scooping there. I only attacked with the Shadow the turn before to stop like a dash Ragavan on the crackback. But here we are, game number 3. Ragavan again. As you can see, like, Ragavan, when I put together a list for Dimir, I'm almost always on like 5 or 6 pieces minimum of 1 mana removal. Sometimes like 7. I'll add like a Blood Chief's Thirst or something on top of 4 push and a Dismember or 2. And it's almost exclusively for Ragavan. Like, you're wanting to hold up mana so badly, but when your opponent's able to cast 2 or 3 spells while you're trying to hold up 1, it's horrendous. So we'll go ahead and convert on one of these stubs here. And since that Hearse would stop Murktide from being relevant, we got to go ahead and kill that. Pass the turn, because if our opponent has an Undying effect and they cast it on the Ragavan, I'm pretty okay with that because like it's not hitting me. But I want to be a little reactive if I can be. Either way, We take a Spyro. Opponent's got a Fury. Thought sees another Hearse. If we go ahead and get down Murktide, we don't really care about the Hearse. We can't block the Fury, but our opponent's on like a pretty quick clock regardless. Dismember for Dolphy is fine. I thought about just like letting the Dolphy go and not dismembering, but I don't think it really mattered with the Stubborn Denial. Either way, opponent doesn't find an answer for the Murktide, which even if they did, we had Stub and Counterspell there. So very fortunate for us. Obviously not having the Iskanta was positive, I think. The card's pretty clunky. My biggest concern is always the threat density with this build. There's some times where you want a threat and you don't see one. Sometimes where you want a threat and you see like a second Murktide, and that's not really what you want. But the deck's still like pretty powerful. If you're a member of any of the Discords that talk about this deck, you might have seen a post I made earlier where I do believe card advantage is one of the biggest hindrances to this deck. When your opponents are playing like a lot of cards that draw, as well as like expressive iterations and underworld breaches and stuff like that to get a bunch of value. Us playing the 1-for-1 game plan can be really rough. The way that we get around that is having dead cards in our opponent's hand. So Murktide dodging like Prismatic Ending, Fatal Push, Bolt, Unholy Heat, all that sort of stuff is a big piece of card advantage, because now we have a live thing on board and our opponent's got a bunch of things in hand that they can't do anything with. Same thing with Shadow, like a big enough Shadow dodging Bolt or Heat or something like that is card advantage. I'm going to put quotes here because it's not necessarily having more cards than your opponent, but it's having your cards be more effective than your opponent's. That's like where Murktide or Dimir Murktide really shines, is invalidating a lot of your opponent's cards by having threats that they can't deal with, or being able to 1-for-1 interact with their few pieces of interaction that do deal with us, and then hopefully countering them out of their leftover like win conditions. So yeah, that's about all I can really say for this list. We'll be playing some more Dimir live in the upcoming weeks. I'm still not like completely satisfied with the list, but I have had, I think, like 3 or 4 4-1s and a trophy. So it has been very, very solid, at least. If you're thinking about picking up a Shadow list currently, then this might be one that appeals to you. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. As always, we'll have the description or the deck link in the description below, as well as the Twitch channel. And if you're enjoying the videos, enjoying the commentary, please, please, please hit the subscribe button. It's great for improving the metrics so we can reach more people, as well as show that this is the kind of content people are interested in seeing. Hope you all have an awesome rest of your day. Stay safe. Enjoy some good food and company. Catch you back live later. Adios for now.